Imagine the year 1850. It is the era of horses, wooden carts, and bricks laid by hand. Under these conditions, in just 3 years, 47 colossal buildings suddenly appeared across America and Europe. These weren't sheds or barracks, they were palaces. They featured marble columns, stained glass windows, rooftop observatories, and miles of underground corridors. The official story? These were asylums for the mentally ill. But here's what is strange. A modern hospital takes 5 to 7 years to build, even with cranes, excavators, concrete mixers, and an army of engineers. Yet they built 47 of these massive complexes in just 36 months. That means they completed 1.5 royal-sized palaces every month. The math doesn't add up. The physics doesn't add up. Logic screams that something is wrong here. Today, we will tear this mystery down to its foundation, because the truth may be far more terrifying than you think. Let's start with the facts, the pure, documented, archival facts. In 1848, the United States passed a law to create a system of state psychiatric institutions. At the time, the country was massive, money was always tight, roads were more like rough trails, and communication between states relied on carrier pigeons and the telegraph, which was only just beginning to be laid. Against this backdrop, between 1848 and 1851, 47 massive complexes were erected. They weren't just hospitals, they were architectural masterpieces. Let's look at the numbers for just one of these buildings. Take, for example, the Trenton Psychiatric Hospital in New Jersey. The main building covers 28,000 square meters. The height of the main dome is 43 meters. The building contains 600 rooms. According to official records, it took only 18 months to build. Now let's do the math. Building 28,000 square meters in 18 months means finishing 1,555 square meters per month. That's 51 square meters every single day. No days off, no stopping for winter when the mortar freezes. And this doesn't even account for the fact that materials had to be delivered by horse-drawn wagons over dirt roads. For comparison, in 2010, the construction of a modern psychiatric hospital in Boston measuring 30,000 square meters took 6 years. 6 years using all of today's modern technology. But wait, that wasn't the only project. At the exact same time, 46 other buildings were being constructed across the country, simultaneously. Each one was as grand as the last. Where did they find enough architects, enough workers, enough materials? Let's look deeper into the materials. One such complex required, on average, 3 million bricks, 800 tons of marble for columns and stairs, 2,000 tons of granite for the foundation, thousands of square meters of stained glass, hundreds of tons of iron for grates and structures. Bricks back then were made by hand, every single one. Molding, drying, firing, a single batch took at least 2 weeks. One brickmaker could produce about 500 bricks a day under perfect conditions. For 3 million bricks, you would need 6,000 man-days. Even if you had 100 brickmakers working without a break, it would take 2 months just to produce the bricks for one building. And the marble? It was quarried by hand and transported over rivers and dirt roads for hundreds of kilometers. Processing a single column took weeks. All of this happened simultaneously across the entire country in an age when the primary mode of transport was the horse. But the strangest thing isn't the scale, it's the uniformity. Look at the photos of these buildings. Trenton, New Jersey, Athens, Ohio, Weston, West Virginia, Overlook, Oregon. Thousands of kilometers separate them. Different states, different contractors, yet they all share the exact same architectural style. Neoclassicism with Gothic elements, a central dome, symmetrical wings, tall windows, colonnades. Even the room layouts are identical. It's as if everyone was working from the same blueprint, the same master plan. But there was almost no communication between states. Architects couldn't instantly exchange blueprints. There were no faxes, no emails. Even the telephone hadn't been invented yet. How did they achieve such uniformity? Official history says it was just the fashionable style of the time, but that doesn't explain the identity of every tiny detail. It doesn't explain why buildings in California and Maine look like they were built by the exact same crew. Now let's look at the workforce. By the most conservative estimates, building one such complex required at least 500 full-time workers. Multiply that by 47 buildings, and you get 23,500 builders working simultaneously across the country. For context, the entire population of the U.S. in 1850 was about 23 million. Of those, about 6 million were able-bodied men. This means these construction sites required nearly 0.4% of the country's entire working male population. This was an era when the vast majority of people were engaged in agriculture. Industry was just beginning. Every pair of hands was worth its weight in gold just to feed a family. Where did they get these people? Who fed them? Who paid them? Where did the money come from? And you know what's funny? Many archival documents state that construction was carried out by local workers under the supervision of invited specialists, but nowhere, absolutely nowhere, are the names of these specialists listed. There are no detailed financial reports. There are no detailed descriptions of the construction process. It's as if someone tried very hard not to leave a trace. And this is only the tip of the iceberg. What I'm telling you now are questions that official history prefers to ignore. But there is even stranger details. There are documents that change the whole picture. There is evidence that contradicts everything we've been told. Information is coming to light that will overturn your understanding of who was actually behind these constructions. There are names, there are connections, there are documents that accidentally surfaced in declassified archives. This information explains not only these 47 buildings, but much more. But for now, let's continue. If the math of the construction doesn't add up, the architecture itself completely breaks the mold. Why build palaces for the insane? And why do these asylums look like something else entirely? Fine. Let's say we somehow ignore the impossible speed of construction. Let's say we explain it away with efficient organization or a large number of workers. Let's assume that's true. But then explain this to me. Why build buildings with decorative stucco on the ceilings for mentally ill patients? Why do they have stained glass windows depicting biblical scenes? Why do they have marble staircases with carved railings? Why do they have observatories on the roofs? Why do they have concert halls with perfect acoustics? Let's look at a specific example. The Athens Lunatic Asylum in Ohio, built in 1874, a bit later than our period, but part of the same series of buildings. The main corridor is 270 meters. The ceilings are 6 meters high. The ceilings feature frescoes, not just any paintings, but the work of professional artists. The floors are mosaics made of imported Italian marble. The windows are handmade stained glass. In every wing, there is a library with carved mahogany bookcases, leather chairs, and polished granite fireplaces. Now compare this to modern psychiatric institutions. Linoleum floors, plastic furniture, metal beds, bars on the windows, bare walls painted beige or white, no decor, maximum functionality at minimum cost. Why? Because it's logical. It's a medical facility, not a museum. The money should go to treatment, staff, and equipment, not to frescoes and marble columns. But in the 19th century, when there was even less money, when psychiatry was just in its infancy, and when the mentally ill were often considered cursed, they suddenly decided to build palaces for them? The official explanation is, it was part of a therapeutic approach. Beautiful surroundings were supposed to calm the patients and promote recovery. It sounds noble. There is one problem. Documents from that same time describe how patients were kept in straitjackets, chained to walls, and subjected to shock therapy with ice water. The treatment methods were barbaric. The mortality rate was astronomical. Against this backdrop, someone was spending massive amounts of money on stained glass and stucco? It doesn't add up. And now, an even stranger detail. Many of these buildings had ventilation systems that were decades ahead of their time. They featured complex underground utilities, heating systems with centralized boiler rooms, and even early sewage and plumbing systems. Take the Kirkbride Hospital in Massachusetts, built in 1854. The building had a forced ventilation system with heated air. Air was taken through underground channels, pushed through furnaces in the basement, and distributed to all rooms via a system of air ducts inside the walls. This technology only became standard in the early 20th century, but they were using it in 1854. How? Where did we get the knowledge to create such systems? Who designed them? Where are the blueprints? Where are the descriptions of the technology? They are nowhere. The documents are either lost or never existed. And one more detail that everyone who studies these buildings notices: the basements. The basements of these buildings are a story of their own. They are massive, labyrinths of corridors going tens of meters deep, rooms with unknown purposes, tunnels connecting different parts of the complex, and in some cases, tunnels that go far beyond the property lines. Officially, these were utility rooms, boiler rooms, and storage areas. But what's odd is that many of these basements have ceilings 4 or 5 meters high. Why do you need that height for a boiler room? The walls are lined with bricks laid with perfect precision. Why maintain such high quality for technical rooms that no one would ever see? And the tunnels? In some hospitals, tunnels stretch for hundreds of meters and exit in the forest a kilometer away from the main building. The official explanation is for transporting coal and supplies. But why dig a kilometer-long tunnel when you could just build a road? It's more expensive, more difficult, and takes longer. Unless those tunnels were used for something else. Unless these buildings weren't originally built as hospitals. Unless these buildings were already standing and they were simply repurposed as asylums because their original purpose had to be hidden. As for what that purpose was, we are about to find out. Get ready, because this is where it gets interesting. Let's step away from American hospitals for a moment and look at maps. In 1754, French cartographer Philippe Bawache published a world map. On this map, across the territory of Eurasia, from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific Ocean, written in huge letters is the word Tartaria. Tartaria, a giant state or territory occupying nearly a quarter of the planet's landmass. In 1771, the first edition of the Encyclopedia Britannica included an entry on Tartaria. It described peoples, cities, and trade routes. It mentioned magnificent architecture and a developed civilization. By 1855, the last mentions of Tartaria disappeared from Western sources. After that, silence. A state the size of a continent simply vanished from the history books. Maps were redrawn, encyclopedias were reprinted without any mention of it. By the beginning of the 20th century, no one remembered Tartaria. The question is, if a civilization of this scale existed, where are its traces? Where are the cities? Where are the roads? Where is the monumental architecture? This is where it gets fascinating. Many researchers point to a strange pattern. Most psychiatric hospitals in America and Europe were built on the sites of older structures. This is directly mentioned in some archival documents. For example, Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts, 1878. Construction reports state the foundation was laid using stones from previously destroyed structures on this site. What structures? When were they destroyed? Who built them? There are no answers. Or take the Weston Hospital in West Virginia. While digging the foundation, workers stumbled upon ancient stonework of unknown origin. What happened to it? No data. They simply built on top of it. And here's something we know for sure. In the mid-1800s, around the same period these hospitals were being built, a wave of strange natural disasters swept the world. 1811 to 1812, a series of massive earthquakes in the Mississippi Valley. Eyewitnesses described the ground rolling like the sea and ancient buildings collapsing. What ancient buildings were in America in 1812? Officially, there were only wooden colonial settlements and indigenous dwellings. 1815, the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia. It was so powerful that 1816 became known as the year without a summer. Crops failed worldwide. Famine set in. But even stranger, Chinese chronicles from this period described the great destruction of ancient cities and the exodus of populations from flooded lands. The 1840s, a series of devastating floods across Europe and Asia. Russian sources mentioned that waters revealed ancient foundations and exposed city walls that were beyond memory. And following all these cataclysms, in the 1850s, a massive worldwide construction of identical buildings suddenly begins. A coincidence? Now let's go back to the architectural style of these hospitals. Neoclassicism, the copying of ancient forms, columns, domes, porticos, all just like ancient Greece and Rome. But think about it. Why was there a sudden, massive interest in ancient architecture in the mid-1800s? And not just interest, but a worldwide, simultaneous reproduction of it.
One theory suggests they weren't copying antiquity. They were restoring what remained of a previous civilization, a civilization that used that same architectural style. These hospitals were actually the former administrative buildings, temples, and universities of that civilization. They were buildings that partially survived the cataclysm. They were repaired, destroyed parts were rebuilt, and they were renamed psychiatric asylums. Why? Here is why. Because they needed a place to put the people who remembered, the people who witnessed what had happened, the people who could tell the truth. The easiest way to discredit a witness is to declare them insane. And what do you do with insane people? Exactly. You lock them in asylums where no one will hear them. Now, let's look at the testimonies of these people. Dr. Edward Jarvis, a psychiatrist from Massachusetts, published a report on the condition of patients in newly opened state hospitals. In this report, there's a very strange section. He wrote, "A significant number of patients exhibit an unusual type of madness. With striking consistency, they describe events that could not have happened, cities that do not exist, technologies that we do not know. They draw maps of non-existent lands and write in languages that cannot be identified." Jarvis dismissed this as collective delusion, but what if it was memory? Let's look at specific cases. Patient number 127, Trenton Hospital, 1851. A middle-aged man, admitted after rioting in the square and screaming about the end of the world. From the doctor's notes, the patient claims to have witnessed a great flood 3 years ago. He describes a wave as high as a bell tower that submerged his city. He insists his city was called something else, not what it is called now. He draws street plans that do not match the current layout. When we attempt to correct him and show him a real map of the city, he falls into a rage and screams that it is not the right city and that the real city is buried underground. Diagnosis: mania with delusional ideas. Treatment: cold dousing, isolation. Outcome: died 2 years later under unexplained circumstances. Was it just one case? Perhaps he really was mad? But there's more. Patient number 89, Athens Hospital, 1855. A 30-year-old woman admitted after trying to hold an unauthorized meeting and distributing leaflets about the true history. From the records, the patient states that modern history is falsified. She claims to remember a different timeline of events. She names rulers that never existed. She describes wars that have no record. When shown history textbooks, she insists that these were written by those who want to hide the truth. Diagnosis: paranoia with delusions of grandeur. Treatment: long-term isolation, occupational therapy. Outcome: died in the hospital at the age of 52. There are dozens of such cases, hundreds. People drawing the same maps of non-existent territories, people describing the same disasters, people writing in languages that are impossible to decipher, yet they understand them perfectly. Furthermore, there are notes where doctors observe a group of patients admitted from different cities who have never met use identical symbols in their notes and drawings. How is this possible if it is simply the babbling of the insane? But the most interesting part is the languages. Samples of patient writings have been preserved in the archives of several hospitals, pages covered in unknown symbols. Officially, they were classified as the product of madness or meaningless scribbles. However, in the 1970s, Barry Fell, a linguist who studied ancient languages, came across photos of these records in the archives. He discovered that some symbols bore a striking resemblance to ancient scripts, Phoenician, Etruscan, and Old Turkic runic.
not an exact match, but a structural similarity, as if it were the same language family but evolved separately. Fell tried to publish his findings. Every major journal rejected his article. The reason? Insufficient scientific basis and reliance on materials of doubtful origin. Convenient, isn't it? And now for the most chilling part. In some doctors' notes, there are mentions that patients possessed knowledge they should not have had. For example, a patient from Overlook Hospital in Oregon, 1874, a man documented as an illiterate farmer, drew a detailed diagram of a steam engine with improvements that weren't patented until 20 years later. Or a female patient from Kirkbride Hospital in 1859 who described the principle of electric lighting 20 years before Edison invented the light bulb. Doctors described this as technical delusion or the fantasies of a diseased mind. But what if these weren't fantasies? What if it was a memory of technologies that existed before the catastrophe? And one more thing. In the records of many patients, the same motif repeats. The stars were in different places. The sky was different. The moon was brighter. Doctors interpreted this as astronomical delusion, but what if it was a memory of a time when something truly changed in the sky, when an event of planetary scale occurred that not only destroyed a civilization, but changed the planet itself? You know what strikes me about this story? The number of coincidences. There are too many for it to be an accident.
A healthy skepticism is good. You have to wonder how you explain these coincidences. Do you believe in the possibility of a lost civilization, or is there a more rational explanation? It is important to keep digging, because next we will analyze specific buildings, look at archaeological anomalies, and study leaks from closed archives. But for now, let's continue. We haven't even reached the main point yet, the technological anomalies that are impossible to explain, construction elements that could not have been created with 19th century technology, and the ultimate question, if these buildings were truly built by another civilization, where is the proof? You are about to see it. Let's talk about the specific physical features of these buildings, details that modern engineers simply cannot explain. Let's start with acoustics. The central hall of Trenton Hospital, a circular room 30 meters in diameter with a dome height of 25 meters. This room has perfect acoustics. If you stand exactly in the center of the hall and whisper, you can be heard at any point in the room with equal volume. There is no echo. The sound is not distorted. In 2005, a group of acousticians from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology conducted a study of this hall. Their conclusion: the acoustic characteristics of the room match modern concert halls designed using computer modeling. Creating such acoustics without precise calculations and computer simulations is practically impossible. But this building was constructed in 1951, when there were no computers, when acoustics as a science was just beginning, when architects worked solely by intuition and experience. How did they do it? Moving on, the stonework. The foundations of many of these buildings use megalithic blocks, stones weighing between 5 and 15 tons, perfectly fitted together without the use of mortar. Danvers Hospital, Massachusetts. In the base of the building are blocks of granite measuring 2 by 1 by 1 meters, laid so tightly that it is impossible to slide a knife blade between them. For comparison, in the 19th century, stones of this size were processed by hand with wedges and hammers. The process took weeks. Precision fitting was achieved through trial and error. Getting a perfect fit was extremely difficult. Yet here, we have perfect fitting on a massive scale, hundreds of blocks. Each one fits its neighbor perfectly. Construction engineer Christopher Dunn, who specializes in ancient stone processing technologies, visited several of these sites and took measurements. His conclusion: the precision of the stone processing matches modern standards of machine cutting. The tool marks on the stone surface indicate the use of technology different from known 19th century methods. What technology? Dunn suggests possibly some form of ultrasonic or resonance cutting. But such technologies did not exist in the 19th century, officially. Now let's look at the anomalies discovered during the renovation and demolition of these buildings.
In the 1960s, the demolition of part of the Athens Hospital in Ohio, workers discovered metal structures inside the walls. They weren't iron beams as expected, but complex lattice structures made of a metal resembling brass or bronze. Furthermore, these structures were embedded in the walls in such a way that it was impossible to remove them without destroying the masonry. This means they were installed before the wall was built. An analysis of the metal showed an unusual alloy composition, a combination of copper, zinc, tin, and traces of other elements that is difficult to reproduce even with modern methods. Why? What were these structures for? The official answer, probably to reinforce the structure. But architects point out that the placement of these elements does not correspond to points of maximum load. They are distributed almost uniformly throughout the walls, as if forming a kind of network. Some researchers suggest this was a system for distributing electricity or some other form of energy throughout the building. Madness? Perhaps, but there is one more detail. Many of these hospitals had strange metal structures on their roofs, officially called weather vanes or lightning rods. But they are too massive for weather vanes and too complex for lightning rods. They were lattice towers up to 10 meters high, topped with metal spheres or cones. Some had rotating elements. Some were connected by wires to the basement rooms. In the 1890s, most of these structures were dismantled. The official reason? Obsolete, interfering with the construction of new wings. But photos exist, and in these photos you can see that these weather vanes were connected by copper wires to the dome structures of the buildings, forming a complex system. A system for what? One engineer who studied these photos proposed a hypothesis. This could have been a device for collecting atmospheric electricity using a method similar to Tesla's system. Nikola Tesla experimented with similar technologies in the 1890s, but these buildings were built in the 1850s. Does this mean these hospitals had an electricity generation system 30 or 40 years before it became a known technology? Or was this system part of the original building constructed by a civilization that already possessed these technologies? And now we come to the most interesting part, the question that ties it all together. If these buildings were part of another civilization, where did it go? What happened to it? And why is everyone silent about it? Now I will show you facts that will make you seriously question what we are taught in school. Let's talk about how information disappears. The 1890s, a massive education reform begins worldwide. History textbooks are rewritten, the school curriculum is standardized, and entire layers of information vanish from the books. Tartaria? It never existed. It was just a general name for the unknown lands of Asia. The great floods and cataclysms of the mid-19th century? Local events of no global significance. Strange archaeological finds? Researcher errors or misinterpretation. And most importantly, old maps and encyclopedias are removed from circulation. Officially, it's for updating information. In reality, most of these materials are destroyed. But some things have survived. The U.S. Library of Congress closed archives. In the 1980s, thanks to a Freedom of Information Act request, some 19th century documents were declassified. Among them was a very interesting report. 1. A report from a commission inspecting state psychiatric institutions. In this report, there's a section titled Previous Use of the Buildings. Quote, "The Commission notes that a significant number of buildings currently used as hospitals were requisitioned from previous owners between 1848 and 1855. Documentation regarding the previous use of the buildings is missing or lost. The Commission recommends not raising this issue publicly to avoid legal claims from possible heirs." Requisitioned, from previous owners. This means these buildings were already standing, and they were simply taken from someone. From whom? The documentation is lost. How convenient. Now let's look at the timeline. 1848 to 1855, the massive construction of hospitals, or as we now know, the requisition of buildings. 1860 to 1870, the massive filling of these hospitals with patients. Many of them were not admitted for medical reasons, but by government order for asocial behavior, spreading false information, or public speeches of unacceptable content. 1880 to 1900, the massive reform of history textbooks and the seizure of old maps and documents. 1910 to 1950, most of these hospitals are overcrowded. Mortality rates skyrocketed, conditions deteriorated. 1960 to 1990, the massive closure and demolition of psychiatric hospitals worldwide. The official reason, reform of psychiatric care, transition to outpatient treatment. In reality, it was the destruction of the buildings and all materials within them.
Do you see the pattern? Seizure of buildings, isolation of witnesses, clearing of information, destruction of evidence. And there are specific cases that show how systemic this cleanup was. 1. Danvers Psychiatric Hospital, Massachusetts. The building is closed, all patients are transferred, the archives vanish. Officially, they were lost during the move. Thousands of documents, records, patient diaries, and medical reports covering 120 years simply disappeared. In 2007, the building was bought by a developer to be demolished and replaced by a residential complex. During the preparations for demolition, workers found a walled-off room in the basement. Inside were shelves of documents, part of the archive. The workers notified the developer. The developer notified the authorities. The next day, a group of people in suits arrived, took all the documents, and the room was sealed. A week later, the building was demolished, completely, to the last brick. Even the foundation was dug up and hauled away. What was in those documents? We will never know. But there is one person who managed to take photos, one of the workers. He photographed several pages on his phone before the documents were taken. In those photos are patient records. On one page, dated 1886, a patient drew a map. The map shows a continent resembling North America, but the coastline is different. And the caption says, "This is how it was before the water." Before what water? This is where everything comes together. Buildings that couldn't be built in 3 years, patients who remembered a different reality, technologies that shouldn't have existed, systemic destruction of information. Everything points to one thing. There was a civilization, there was a cataclysm, and there was a cleanup. But one trace remained that is impossible to erase, and now I will show it to you. There are things you cannot hide, even if you control the textbooks, the archives, and the media, because some traces are too big to hide. I'm talking about geological anomalies. All over the world, there is a layer of soil that geologists call the 19th century cultural layer. It is a layer of earth that covers the foundations of old buildings, the first floors, and sometimes entire streets. The official explanation, natural accumulation of soil over time. But there's a problem. The rate of soil accumulation, according to all geological models, is 1 to 3 millimeters per year. This means it would take 300 to 1,000 years to accumulate a layer of 1 meter. Yet, in many cities in Europe and America, this layer appeared in just 30 to 50 years, between the 1840s and the 1890s. St. Petersburg, Russia. During excavations in the city center, it is regularly discovered that the first floors of 19th century buildings are 1.5 to 2 meters below the modern street level. Chicago, in the 1850s, the city was practically lifted by 2 meters. Officially, it was to create a sewer system. But they didn't just lift the roads, they lifted entire buildings, hundreds of them. Why, if you can just build sewers under the roads? Or were they lifting them to hide the lower floors, floors that were buried in mud during a cataclysm? Amsterdam, Netherlands. The old city has basements that were once first floors. In these basements are windows, beautiful stained glass windows. In a basement. Why put stained glass windows in a basement? The answer, when they were made, it wasn't a basement, it was the first floor. Then came the water, the mud, and the city was buried. And here is what is absolutely certain. At approximately the same time, in the mid-19th century, a series of catastrophic floods occurred worldwide. But they weren't ordinary floods. They were mud flows. Chronicles from that time describe the water came with mud. The flow carried stones and trees. The city was buried under a layer of silt. This isn't rain. This isn't a river overflowing. This is something else. Some researchers suggest it was a mud flood, the result of some planetary cataclysm, perhaps an asteroid hitting the ocean, creating a mega tsunami, perhaps a shift in the Earth's crust, perhaps something else. But the result was the same. Civilization was buried. Partially, not completely, but enough that the world changed. And the survivors started a new history, a history in which there was no Tartaria, no advanced civilization, no cataclysm. A history where 47 buildings were impossible to build in 3 years with 19th century technology. We have testimonies from people who were declared insane but told the exact same story. We have technological anomalies that don't fit the official timeline. We have systemic destruction of information over 150 years. And we have geological evidence of a cataclysm.
Is all of this just a coincidence, or parts of one big picture? I am not giving you a ready-made answer, because the truth is something everyone must find for themselves. I am giving you facts, questions, discrepancies. From here, you decide. What do you think? Do you believe in the possibility of a lost civilization, or do you think there's a rational explanation for all these oddities? Your opinion is truly important. Perhaps among you are those who know more, those who have seen something that isn't talked about publicly, those who can add a piece to this puzzle. And here is the final question I want you to think about. If the civilization that existed before us was truly more advanced, if it possessed technologies we're only now beginning to understand, if it was destroyed in a cataclysm, then who are we? Heirs? Or just new tenants on the planet who found ruins and made up our own story? And most importantly, if this is true, if we have been lied to, who is behind it? Who controls the information? And why? Because there can only be 2 reasons. Either they are protecting us from a truth we are not ready to accept, or they are keeping us from a truth that would make us free. Which one it is up to you to decide. I will continue to search. The truth is out there, and perhaps, together, we will find it. 47 buildings, 3 years, millions of questions, one answer that changes everything.